No. Okay. Before talking about open educational practices and social annotation, I want to talk about some of the historical roots of how we got here. We wouldn't be talking about open education without the scholarship of several key theorists who worked to break down barriers of white supremacist and educational systems. An emancipatory approach to education is heavily represented in the works of the scholars listed here, and they have promoted innovative approaches in education that have been successful in practice. Emancipatory pedagogies focus on the notion that education should play a role in creating a just and democratic society. This requires a negotiated curriculum based on true dialogue that values social interaction, collaboration, authentic democracy, and self-actualization towards making fundamental changes both in the individual and society. All right, the agenda for today, I'm going to go over what exactly social annotation is and just list some of the social annotation tools. Then I'm going to go into some research evidence on social annotation, focusing on two studies that I've conducted and published. I'm going to demo one social annotation tool hypothesis. And the reason why I am focusing on this one is because Shauna told me the University of Regina has access to that. That's the social annotation tool for the institution. Um, I will give the caveat that most of my experience is with perusal, but the research findings and the assignments and all of that transfer very nicely over to hypothesis. And I'm going to give some examples for incorporating social annotation into courses. So social annotation is where students and the instructor highlight and take notes, which has been a reading practice since college has existed. But what differs from typical note taking on readings is that students share their notes with each other. So there's a shared electronic document or other type of file, and students have comments on that document. And here is an example of how those comments can look on a document. There are multiple tools for social annotation. There's Perusal, Hypothesis, and Google Docs. Um, a benefit of social annotation is that it takes advantage of online affordances. So, with paper, you can take notes, but you can't share your notes as easily. And with social annotation, sharing is part of the purpose. There's also options for things like you can insert links, videos, you can give audio responses, you can have images in your responses. And you can also tag people like you do on social media, where you enter somebody's name and they get a notification that you commented on them, and you can like what they have to share too. Hypothesis has a particular advantage where it also allows for public sharing of comments. So if that's something that would be beneficial for document review or for putting student work forward, then that is a helpful option. Social annotation works beautifully with open educational resources. I have only used it with either OER or public domain work, so government documents. Um, the process with commercially copyrighted materials is a little bit different. I'm not really terribly familiar with that, but the open licensing with OER makes it so this works really well. And that's one of the reasons why social annotation is an open educational practice. So, open educational practices, I have the definition here, are the creation, use, and reuse of open educational resources as well as open pedagogy. So, and then just explain the terms within the definition for the definition. The open educational resources are materials openly licensed for sharing and editing. I'm a big fan of Creative Commons. And then open pedagogy is students creating or co-creating OER. There's a lot of different definitions for open pedagogy. There is a whole article on the definition of open pedagogy. So I am summarizing and giving a very broad overview there. Um, and then just to add a little bit about what I mean by licensing, licensing is what makes open education. It's what makes us distinctive from other sorts of education. One of the more common forms of um, open licensing is Creative Commons. It's the one I'm most familiar with. And you can see in the figure on the right, there's a list of different options. This is not an exhaustive list, but here's some examples of the different options and combinations that you can have with Creative Commons licensing. In this, the person making the work maintains their rights, and depending on the variation, um, there may be editing that's allowed and redistribution, and also you can retain the documents, you can keep them. The licensing also allows for sharing and accessing without paying fees. So I'm going to go over some of the research evidence on social annotation to hopefully my thinking is once you see some of the data, then it will be even more intriguing to try out social annotation in your own classes. If you are interested, I wrote a chapter that has an overview of studies I've done on social annotation. It's called, very not creatively, A Series of Studies on Social Annotation, and it's about a series of studies I did on social annotation. So, for the first study I'm going to go about, I'm going to talk a little bit about what prompted me to conduct the study. So, at the time I did this, one thing I was looking at was what do we already know about social annotation? We already know from a number of studies that students seem to be more engaged, and it helps with peer interactions in online courses. So courses where students aren't having a shared meeting time, specifically asynchronous. We also know that it promotes peer-to-peer interactions, and that is with experimental evidence where peers were interacting with each other more when they had the opportunity for social annotation in an online course. It allows for what's called shared meaning making, and this relates back to emancipatory pedagogies and with having students have an opportunity to negotiate with the curriculum. Uh, there's an opportunity with social annotation for students to speak back to the text and to also construct meaning of the text together. It can has also there's some evidence that students are more likely to actually do the reading, which we all know that if you assign reading, the odds that it's going to be done just because you assigned it, it's not super high. We need to have students be held accountable in some way. Students report better emotional experiences with social annotation compared to individual note taking. There's also thinking about social justice issues. Social annotation can give students an opportunity to be empowered because they're able to speak back to the text. Brown and Croft talk about how it can flatten power structures because the students can challenge or counter the ideas of the author of the text rather than just seeing the author as an authority figure that they must listen to or learn by. And there's also some evidence that social annotation can help with what's called screen inferiority. In my other line of research, I do a lot of work on digital and flexible modalities for reading. And there's a good amount of evidence that we read better when we read off of paper compared to screens, especially when we're looking at nonfiction texts. But that's comparing screen and paper where you're not taking advantage of those affordances of the screen. Social annotation is something that a screen can do, the paper cannot. So it's a screen affordance. And when you have the affordances of screens taken advantage of, then you can actually see a benefit for reading from a screen compared to paper. So, what do we still need to know? Well, one is a theoretical lens. A lot of the research done on social annotation has not been theoretically grounded. Another is some empirical investigation into social justice based on what Brown and Croft suggested about the potential for social annotation. Now, they also cautioned that social annotation could provide negative experiences because students may have more opportunities for things such as microaggression, or you may have students being blatantly prejudiced in their comments. And there's also not much examination in a face-to-face modality. Much of the work has been done online, and especially nowadays, even in face-to-face classes, students tend to be reading things digitally. And finally, a review of studies found that there's not a whole lot of examination with grades. So I looked at social annotation in the context of a motivation theory that has been around for decades called self-determination theory. And according to this, we have basic human needs, and when they're met, we tend to be more motivated. And these needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Um, and I wanted to see how social annotation was perceived by the student in terms of each of these components of motivation. What I was also interested in was social justice for open education. So if we think about these principles of social justice, redistributive or cognitive representational justice, um, the process of social annotation where students are able to speak from their unique experiences and share their ideas, it allows for better co-construction of materials and the possibility to tell one's own story. So the thinking was is there's an opportunity for representational justice, but I wanted to actually measure that. So these are the research questions. I was looking at motivation, representational justice, and how these constructs all related with the students' grades in the course. In my methods, I had an undergraduate face-to-face child development course. The students were assigned readings from an open educational resource, and they were required to complete annotations on each chapter before class. I would go through these annotations after they were submitted and respond to the questions. I would tag students so that they know I was responding to them. And then students completed a survey on social annotations. And I also got measures about the students commenting and reading from Perusal, which is the software that we use at UND. And then I also looked at their course grades, not including the points they earned on the social annotation assignments. And there's a lot of bars here. But what you can see overall is that motivation in terms of autonomy, so choice and pressure, those are considered measures of autonomy. Um, Social annotation was better than quizzes for those measures of autonomy. You want more choice and less pressure. We do see some benefits of individual note taking because it's not required. It's understandable that it's scored higher with choice. And then competence, we see that social annotation was higher, relatedness, social annotation was higher, and then interest and enjoyment. So there's a definite benefit over quizzes. Individual note taking is a little bit mixed. Uh, I used a measure of representational justice that Lindsay Gavush and I developed for a different study on open pedagogy. And I we used items such as these, and I looked to see how students' responses related to midpoint. It was significantly higher than midpoint. So the midpoint is 3, the average is 3.87, but this is out of a 5-point scale. So there definitely is room to grow in terms of whether or not students felt opportunities for representational justice. So what about grades? According to Perusal, active reading, that meant the student appeared to actually be reading. It wasn't just the reading was open. Was positively correlated with grades. The number of annotations, so less students made more than the requirements, helped with grades. And also the more they wrote. Their motivational measures of competence, positively related to grades, also relatedness. Not all the measures they looked at were positively associated. What I found interesting, though, is when I dug into it a little bit more, it appeared that the more students annotated, the more active reading time they had, and that explained their better grades. So you, you see this nice benefit of learning from the text through annotations because it encourages them to spend more time actively reading it. Possibly because, having these posts and things are interesting for the students. I got a lot of feedback that they've really enjoyed it. In fact, the main criticism was that the groups were too small. They wanted to have more peer comments to get to read from, which made me very happy. All right, I'm going to talk about another study. This one I did with Allison Kelly, who's a psychology professor at UND as well. And we looked at sense of belonging. So, sense of belonging, where you feel like basically you are where you should be when you're in college or elsewhere. For students, it's a really important basic human need, and there's a lot of links to post-secondary success. Sense of belonging has mostly been looked at with face-to-face on-campus students, but there isn't much inquiry for online students, and we other than we know that they have less feelings of sense of belonging than a face-to-face student. So what we wanted to look at was, does social annotation promote sense of belonging in online courses? So we had students in two online courses. One was an undergraduate intro to psych course that Allison taught, and another one was a graduate level educational psychology course that I taught. And within our courses, we randomly assigned students to individual social annotations. Now, the one nice thing from a research design with an online class is you can have things set up so students only see the materials in their condition. So, they're it just leads to less confusion when you're giving students in a face-to-face course different instructions, which is possible. I've done it, but anyway. And then they completed a end of semester survey about course belonging. And Perusal was the platform we used. Here's an example of annotations from one of Allison's courses. You can see Allison's little um, cartoon picture there, and she is commenting back on the students' comments. For the individual annotations, students were required to make the same kind of comments and the same number of comments on the same readings, but they just submitted their PDF with notes. They didn't have a shared document such as this. And what you can see here is this is individual. These are students who did individual note taking, and these are students who did decision note taking. And there's a pretty big shift here for the Intro to Psych, the Psych 111 course. But for Ed Psych, there is not. It's basically the same for individual or social. So sense of belonging appeared to be promoted for social through social annotation for the intro course, but not the advanced. Anecdotally, and just what I know from these courses, most of the students in graduate school, they already knew each other. So this was an on-campus program, and this was one of the few online courses that they took. So their need for peer interaction was just not as high. Whereas students in intro to psych were from all over campus. They may be purely online students, and having that opportunity to interact with their peers was really valuable. All right, on to social annotation tools. I'm going to talk about hypothesis. Hypothesis is a social annotation tool that is openly licensed, so it's very easy to it is easy to access, so you don't need to pay to use it. Your annotations or comments can be private or public. They can be individual or group, and then within those groups, the groups can be private, restricted, or open. So it can be that they're private, meaning nobody even knows about them, restricted, meaning um, they're you can see them, but you can't just join, and open means anybody can open that group. So I'm going to show you a little bit about Hypothesis. So this is the website, and um, they have a free ebook, which I did download, and it was very helpful. That has a lot of logistical information. So you click on login, and you can see here I made a demo group. I made it with myself, and I named my other alt ego Demo Virginia to test this out. And you can see that if you look at here, there are two groups of annotations. So here is an individual annotation I made, um, where I was looking at a research article, and I can click on Visit Annotations in Context. And it comes up here where I can see what I highlighted and what I commented on. So I made this, oh, I thought I made it private. Oops. Oh, well, I made it public. Let's see. Oh, no, I did make it private. Post only to me. Can't, but I can also add comments that can be seen by other people. So this is something that can be set up on pretty much any website. What you do is there's a Chrome button that can be added. If you use Chrome, there's other web browsers that can be added, and then you click on that to get there. So for the scope framework, I decided to use my own website out of curiosity. So I can access my comments either I can go up to the extensions and then hypothesis and then here. And these are my group comments. So people within the group can see them. And another way that can be accessed is if I go here to the scope framework. Um, Then I can visit annotations in context and public. And I made that comment. And then this one was, oops, test comment. That should be only to me. Now I fixed it. That's private. And then this is demo group. So that is the logistics involved. It is pretty easy and user-friendly. If you want to reply, you just click this button and then hey, this is a reply. And then I can post it to the group. And the group isn't wildly open. So Shauna pointed out something important, which is that if you are using this through the University of Regina, or if your institution does have an account with Hypothesis, then this is something that would be integrated in with your learning management system. You If it's like Perusal, you need to go into the settings and click to add, but it is a pretty smooth process. So if for Blackboard, which is the learning management system used at my institution, you go into tools and then content marketplace, and then you add it there. So I wish this bar didn't show. Okay. Oh well. Let's talk some assignment ideas with Hypothesis. So there are a lot of different things you can do with this. I'm going to talk about some general reading assignments and then a a kind of bigger semester-long open pedagogy project that I've worked on. So one is to do syllabus accountability and collaboration. With that, what I have students do is to make sure they've read the syllabus or to increase the likelihood they'll read the syllabus, they're required to make a certain number of comments about the syllabus. Um, I have heard of instructors that use this for a collaborative syllabus. And in that, they have students help select the readings and suggest topics. Um, I love the idea of a collaborative syllabus, but to be honest, I am just too type A to show up for class on the first day and not have my syllabus ready to go. So, maybe someday I'll grow enough and be able to try that. I do love the the concept of a collaborative syllabus. Another is pre-class reading accountability for face-to-face courses. So to make sure that students have some kind of assignment that holds them to reading the assigned readings. To increase reading engagement and peer interaction for online courses. So again, they're having a shared reading of the documents, but it's um, an extra bonus of having an opportunity for your online students to connect with each other. There are plugins where you can add Hypothesis to Pressbooks, which is a collection of openly licensed materials. Uh, and you can also add Hypothesis to if you have some kind of website with your course outside of a learning management system. With all of these, the prompts can either be general or specific. So, for an example of a general prompt, this is something that I've had on for my online courses. So, on, say, a textbook chapter or a assigned reading, a journal article. They need to have 4 comments on each reading and they need to post on 3 separate days. I do 3 separate days because I have found that if I really want them to engage and interact with the peers, they need to be doing this more than once a week and clarifying how many ratings there are and how many comments, upvoting and tagging. Tagging means, replying directly to somebody or pointing something out to somebody. Upvoting is similar to liking or hearting on social media. And I have um, examples of what kind of length and complexity they are required to have that are in my discussion board guidelines. For face-to-face courses, I'm a lot more lenient because the goal is just a check that they did something with the reading beforehand. And it's also an opportunity for me to see when they're confused about something, and then I can clear up that confusion. So here are some examples for specific prompts, and obviously these are not something you can use for every reading. It's very reading specific. So the first one is you've got a chapter on infancy, say in my child development course, and then telling students to indicate ideas and suggestions and why they would be particularly helpful for parents. And then for adolescents, this is something I have students do in class as an activity, but it is something that I would be able to move pretty smoothly to a prompt for the chapter if it were an online format where students are asked to share examples of someone they know that's either fictional or real that demonstrates a particular concept in adolescence. And very few people want to share personal examples from adolescence, so that's why I have it framed that way. So this is my open pedagogy assignment that I use perusal with. And this has been a pretty involved process that I'm quite proud of. It's gone quite smoothly. Where I have my students helping me update the openly licensed textbook we're working with. So this is the textbook, it's Child Growth and Development. It's quite good. It is an OER, it's Creative Commons licensed, but it was published in 2019. It needs citation updates. It's also, like most work in child development, overly representative of male and white scholars, and edits to the content are needed. So, um, there's also issues where the writing can be confusing in parts and would would benefit from clarification. So this is the social annotation assignment. Students are required to, for a class, uh, write a minimum of 5 comments, and they're encouraged to flag outdated citations. So here's an example where a student said that citation is, needs to be updated. It's almost 10 years old. They're also encouraged to point out confusing text. So then, with the outdated citations, a librarian came and taught them about how to use scholarly databases. Then they were taught the difference between a scholarly source and a non-scholarly source. And then students were assigned one of the textbook chapters and told to find an article that would update some of the information in the textbook. And when they find that article, they needed to have it approved by me. And I gave them time in class to work on this and walk them through the process. Them being first year college students for the most part, a lot of this was very new to them. Once they had their article, I had them organize the information into a PDF. I had them annotate the PDF. And part of this is just to get them to slow down and really think about what they're doing with the article. And the other part, I'll be honest, at least for now, it is difficult to have AI annotate things for you. So, um, because I wanted students to be able to identify these and think about these components of articles and develop their information literacy skills, I found that having them annotate these key elements was a really useful exercise. So they were asked to, identify the title of the article, author, journal name, year, and abstract. Just that information is just part of understanding how journal articles are formatted. And then the other aspects were a little bit more vague, but we talked about how to find those in the article. So they would write about what the topic, research questions, and then what the conclusions were. Textbook meant where in the textbook should the information in this article go. So they were asked to give a page number and then also to elaborate on how the information in the article could be used to update the textbook. And then finally to give a reference. So here is an example of how the information was organized into a table by one of the students. This was a particularly strong example where the student really went into detail for the textbook section and had a lot of really helpful suggestions for how the textbook could be updated. Then I took those tables and those articles and I used the student work to update the textbook. So, I had my laptop with the table on one screen, and then I have a working Google document with all of the edits and changes in green on another screen. And I either added in references. So here, this is an example where the finding held up in more recent evidence, and all I needed to do was add an updated citation. The other part was it was a study that, or a finding or a concept that hadn't really been talked about in the textbook, so I did need to add on to that. Um, so I did that. The first time I did that was fall 24. So then I did this whole process again in fall 25. My next step is to go forward with updating that textbook and then share it out. So the students in fall of 2025 had the textbook that had been updated by fall of 2024. And overall, it's been a very positive experience for students. I've been collecting data on this experience, and students overwhelmingly really appreciated it, and were glad that I was doing it, and said, kind of keep it up, keep updating it. It's great that, we're doing this, and then we're learning skills. They're really important. So, in summary, for the various points I had throughout, social annotation may improve student motivation, sense of belonging, and encourage active reading, which can then subsequently improve grades in a course. And Hypothesis is an openly licensed, user-friendly social annotation tool. I was able to figure out how to use it fairly quickly and without any formal training. Um, and I, you know, think it's definitely something I will consider using in the future. Social annotation works really well with OER's open licensing, and that's because the commenting and all of that and the rights to the work, you don't have to worry about it with the tool as you might with something that has a copyright or is commercialized. And open pedagogy assignments may incorporate social annotation. So I showed a very involved example where I have students updating a textbook, but you could also have social annotation used for peer review. And you can use that with open pedagogy assignments or assignments where students are producing OER. And then also, if they have public-facing comments or they opt to have public-facing comments, that can also be a form of open pedagogy or renewable assignments. So I'm going to stop. Well, I'm going to put this up first. If you would like to learn more about renewable assignments, open pedagogy in general, I have a guide that I put together here. It has links to resources, examples, research evidence of a variety of faculty um, things faculty can do to incorporate open pedagogy into their courses. And, I start off with small changes and smaller assignments that are relatively quick and easy to implement, and then move in throughout the guide to more and more complex, where then, it's things like having students write the whole textbook. So, I am going to stop sharing now, and I would love to hear from all of you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.